What does it really mean to shape a place?
The mistake is to think, I've got this basket of services. Your bit is to focus on your economy, your communities, your physical places. What's difficult is people go at different paces. You know, when you talk to Age Concern or CAB and they tell you the profile of the sorts of cases that come over their front desk, it tells you what's going on in your communities. We've known for over 20 years now, for example, that if you get a reoffender that kind of in that cycle of kind of in and out of jail, if they can come out to a home and a job, reoffending rates drop 75%. And that kind of sense of how in roles like this you can change people's lives.
What does it really mean to shape a place? To guide not just the buildings and infrastructure, but the people, the stories, and the future of a community. I'm delighted to be joined today by Mark Barrow, an experienced Director of Place, who is here to discuss this with us. The role of a Director of Place isn't just about planning or policy, it's about purpose. It's about asking the big questions: what are we here to do, and who are we here to do it for, and with who? Mark and I will discuss what place leadership is, how it impacts lives, and what his advice is for people aspiring to be a successful public sector leader. Mark, the term place and place-based services is bandied around quite a lot in local government and across the wider public sector as well. But for those that perhaps aren't aware of the phrase place, could you just tell us a bit about what does place mean?
It's an interesting question, actually. So if you were to look at it as a bunch of services, that would be wrong. And it's easy to look at other service areas within a council and say, well, you know, that's care, that's kind of education, children-based services, etc. So in a place sense, I've always thought it's everything that's within our boundary. And that's, you know, physical infrastructure as well as social infrastructure. It's about your economy and it's about your communities and it's about your society. All of those things are in the mix of activities that we get involved with as kind of place directors, and kind of how you fuse all of that together and kind of work with multi-agencies and different sectors to produce beneficial outcomes for your economy and for your society is kind of, I think, the key way to look at it. So the mistake is to think, I've got this basket of services. Your bit is to focus on your economy, your communities, your physical places, and how you bring, it doesn't matter even if it's not in your bailiwick, you bring other people to bear to get, you know, better outcomes for all of those. So it's a fascinating kind of magical kind of space of, you've got lots of things in your own toolkit, but you've also got the remit to bring other people together to play, to do better things for your society. So I think there's a little kind of, you know, lesson there really, which is don't be constrained in your thinking.
I'd love to know a bit more about your career overall so far. Walk us through, where did you start your career and some of the roles that you've held? Because I know you've worked in different local authority settings at different levels. So I'd love to just hear a bit more about your experience of place shaping in different communities.
Yeah, okay. Well, I actually started life as a carpenter, believe it or not. And after finishing that apprenticeship, I became a trainee surveyor.
Right.
So that kind of started the love of building things and making a difference and understanding what that might mean in terms of, you know, change. And then as a surveyor involved in property, what I really got to understand was the power of assets as part of change and as part of supporting services and being commercial and developing kind of a range of, you know, approaches to the use of property that impacted on all sorts of services. So that kind of curiosity is what then spread over into interest in other services. And this is what we all do. We all start in an area and then we kind of creep across, gathering other bits of responsibility as we go. And that was kind of my journey. So I started in property, then kind of moved over into my first direct role, believe it or not, was over 20 years ago at Great Yarmouth. And I had an environment and economy brief there. So that was a really interesting opportunity to kind of get under the skin and bring together a range of issues and quite a lot of complex issues that, you know, seaside towns like Great Yarmouth face. And I kind of grew from there, really. So that kind of sense of then, once you're able to show that you can manage and deliver in a different service area, well, that's kind of your general set of management skills that kind of set you on a course for senior leadership, really. So kind of started in that area. I've moved around the country into different areas. So I've been a district chief executive. I've worked in unitaries. Excitingly, I worked in Birmingham for some time as well. So yeah, I've got involved though, principally where something has really caught me, and I've really kind of been interested in the role, not the position, more about the role.
Yeah. So how was it then going from being a chief exec of a Barrow District Council into being a director in the biggest council in the whole of Europe, I think, right?
Yeah.
What were the differences of going from that scale wise, and also the adjustment from being at the top as chief exec back into being a sort of exec director level?
Well, that change of kind of being a chief and then going to director, fine. I've never really been caught up in that kind of sense of position.
Yeah.
The fascinating thing, though, about moving to Birmingham was, as anyone who's in the world of kind of districts or smaller unitaries will tell you, it's quite difficult to get the ear of government. The minute you move to a big city, you get influence. They answer your calls. You get to play on different stages. We did a lot of international work and a lot of twin city work when I was at Birmingham, which was fascinating. So you've got this agility piece of working in smaller authorities where you can communicate quickly, you can respond to things in a very agile way, versus then what you have in the bigger authorities like Birmingham, which is about scale and capacity. But you also have extra specialisms. You have that bigger kind of critical mass in those services, and you can do more with the people you've got generally rather than having to buy stuff in. So it's a little bit different in that sense. There's another bit about kind of your power of convening kind of grows a bit as well because of where you are and, who you're representing. So that was all kind of, fascinating. Now, what's interesting, though, about Birmingham, and it's kind of quite current, I think, in the world of local government reorganisation is, we hear a lot in this country about, is it too big? And my response to that is no. When you get out in the world, we used to do a lot with Chicago, interestingly, and that's a population of 2.7 million people with only 50 aldermen, whereas Birmingham is 1.1 million people with 101 councillors. Nobody talks about whether Chicago is functioning well or is a global city that's, punching its weight. And likewise, if you look across in Germany, there is, a range of different structures. And I think we just need to get out in the world a bit more and understand what works. So it'd be fascinating to see how local government reorganisation finally settles in this country and what we're left with.
It would. So you've got quite an interest in politics overseas as well as local government in England and what could be done from what you've seen abroad. Are there any other things that you've spotted that work really well overseas, or whatever the term is? And what do you think local government in England could really benefit from?
Well, it's really interesting. I think one of the interesting facets of being a place director is your ability to get into those spaces, where other people are doing things differently in other parts of the world. So, for example, in Chicago, they wanted to develop a business district on the outskirts of the city. So the mayor holds a referendum. They put 2p on a price of a coffee, and that raises the money, and they fund the new business park. We haven't got that kind of level of fiscal devolution. So, yes, we've got mayors at a level, but there's something here about have they really got the toolkit that mayors around the world have got? And no, they haven't. I was also blown away once when I went to Japan and met a municipality on the very tip of the main Honshu Island who were spending 300 million yen on blowing a hole in a mountain to create a link to their high-speed network. And they were doing that locally, and they raised the money locally. They didn't need permission from their government. They just went ahead and did it because they wanted to do it. And when you get out in the world, you see these examples and you realise that in a global competition sense, what our cities are up against. And I think we need to kind of enable them more and empower them more.
Yeah. And think outside the box as well, I think.
Yeah.
It sounds like there are, with some good reasons, some restrictions in place that hold us back. Perhaps, we're quite traditional in the way that we run our local government services. Talk to me a bit about innovation, modernisation more generally in place services. What have you led in terms of sort of transforming place services in your career to date? Right.
Well, of course, every council service in some way or other has been on quite a journey in recent years. In terms of kind of place-based services, I think principally through austerity in more recent times, it's just the commerciality. It's that kind of, we can no longer be dependent on resource from government. What I call the funny money is drying up all over the place unless you're around the table for devolution. So that ingenuity about being creative about where resource comes from to keep the capacities you need has been a really important kind of area of skill and development for most services in some ways. So I think that's probably the biggest. Of course, if we think about what's ahead and what we're preparing for, though, there's this thing about how jobs are changing through the impact of technology, and more recently massively sped up through AI. But actually, we were all talking about automation just before that. So there's this bit about preparing our services and our people for that next wave of skill sets that they need. And if we believe all the research, then in the next 15 years, 75% of jobs are going to be fundamentally different. That's going to apply to local government too. So what does that mean? So I'm really interested in kind of that continual journey for change, if you know what I mean. And a range of external circumstances kind of cause that. That ability, though, I think for people to kind of multi-skill and multitask has become even more important. So I think they're kind of perhaps the biggest ones. There are some things, aren't there, about kind of areas of service and areas of practice that have kind of changed and modernised. And, I'm old enough, to remember back in the millennium leading the e-government programme in Gloucestershire. And when I think about what happened from the time somebody first told me there was this thing called Google to where we are now.
A lot's happened.
It's amazing. Yeah,
absolutely. I think, there's such a great opportunity for local government to be at the forefront of utilising AI. It's moving very, very quickly. We're even finding this in our business. We do use AI to a degree, but we're priming ourselves for what the future might look like and how it can benefit us and make efficiencies. So, why wouldn't a local authority, reap the same benefits, really?
Well, it puts a different spin on a digital transformation program, doesn't it? And what that means, it really speaks to some of the more complex services, like how can we better support older people at home using technology? So it's not just about sensors, but things that think in some way. There's all sorts of applications that are going to be fascinating, really. And this is one of the interesting things about being part of the world that we're in, which is, we're at the forefront of change, aren't we? And we're helping bring about that change in society. And that's quite exciting.
It's really exciting. Absolutely. I just want to move into your experiences as a leader in place services. Now, often in local government, there's ongoing cuts, budgets being squeezed, and sadly, often place services are one of the first areas to be cut in some ways or another for the sort of non-essential services. So, what's your experiences in that space of sort of remaining resilient when some of your service areas are perhaps being slashed or reduced, and how do you look at other ways to generate money and income for your service areas?
Yeah, that's at the heart of kind of most place directors' challenges at the moment. There's this bit, isn't there, at the beginning of that, which is I hold the maxim, which is resources follow priorities. So when we're going through the process of allocating resources, we're really clear that they are following priorities, and we're kind of just helping the politicians kind of make those difficult decisions at times and make sure that there's a match in that sense. I think secondly then, the authority that I left most recently, I had broadly £150 million a year as a budget. Half of that came from external income. Of what was left, over half of that was wrapped up in PFI. And then when you boil down what you've got left to actually control, it's actually not that much, if that makes sense. So there's a little bit about really understanding where your levers are and what you can kind of change. And of course, that bit about, over half the service was funded from income. It's just a given today. Where do you get income? And of course, people push back at car park charges and other forms of charges.
Green waste charges and things like that.
They're a necessity today that keep a lot of services alive. So there's that kind of strategic approach. And I think there's something else about where else can you position yourself to support other services deal with their challenges. So, for example, if you've got housing as part of your portfolio, how does that help, adult and children's care? What is it in terms of service innovation that you can bring that helps them with their pressures? So you kind of, that team approach to these budget challenges, I think, is really important.
I think so too. And I was going to come on to that actually about how you, as a director of place and leader in various different settings, have worked as part of a system. So systems leadership, both internally with your other service areas, but externally with the health sector and various other key police, various other key stakeholders. Place sits at the heart of a lot of that. And I'd be keen to know your experiences or your views on the importance of system leadership in place.
For me, that's the game in town at the moment. And there is this issue about agencies from across government or elsewhere that do things that tick boxes, and yet the overall outcome for society isn't as good as it should be. We've known for over 20 years now, for example, that if you get a reoffender that kind of in that cycle of kind of in and out of jail, if they can come out to a home and a job, reoffending rates drop 75%. But yet there's no shift in any of the money and the priorities from government to kind of really understand that kind of, let's call it prevent kind of activity. Yeah. If you talk to a health professional about what's the best outcome that you can have on health, they will say it's about kind of, a decent home and quality food on the table.
It all starts with a good home.
But what shifts actually in terms of those resources to support that kind of prevent type activity? So you've always got this kind of working in a system type approach. I think there's a range of kind of examples that you can give there. So one of the ones that I was kind of leading in Shropshire was the River Severn Partnership work, which is about our water resource climate change adaptation partnership piece, working from source to sea, from the Welsh Hills down to the Bristol Estuary. And that was kind of fascinating in terms of getting everybody involved in a conversation about a single uniting asset. And I think if you can kind of strike that kind of position where you can put an issue at the centre of the table and get everyone to kind of work around it, then that's a really important part of what we do in councils, is kind of system leadership type work. Yeah. And there's loads of evidence for how that works, why that works, how that creates better beneficial outcomes. And let's be honest, if we don't do it, it doesn't happen.
Exactly that.
So I think there's something really important there for people.
Yeah. On the theme of joint working, I'm really keen to explore with you your experience of working with major stakeholders, be that internally, externally, or both. From a leadership perspective, what kind of key principles and behaviours do you think that are helpful and that you've applied yourself to really drive change and influence stakeholders around you? Because as a director of place, you have to influence a whole host of people. How do you go about that?
Well, there's a bit, isn't there, about... here's one bit, really. I hold the phrase, which is businesses don't do business, people do business. So there's something about your relationships, how you engage, that kind of credibility, that kind of network that you build of influence in your role. I've always thought there's something about having evidence for action. So when you go into bat, have a strong basis of kind of evidence that creates a compelling narrative that helps people move towards that position. There's something about maybe spending more time about what they're thinking than what you're thinking, and understanding, what's important to them, what outcomes they want, and how you can find that space where it's, common purpose. And then there's something about, not needing to be at the forefront of everything, not being the one who kind of takes all the plaudits, and kind of just supporting that ecosystem of partnership that works. Now, what's difficult is people go at different paces. And when you're in a partnership arena, that can sometimes be a little bit frustrating, but actually it can also be a space for creativity. Because, for example,
and reflection, I suppose, as well.
So if it's difficult for the NHS to kind of raise capital locally, but they can revenue, well, maybe you find a way of doing things where they can contribute revenue and not the capital. Those sorts of things are just there to be looked at.
Absolutely. And one of the obviously major stakeholder groups is the communities that councils serve. The residents themselves are people that use the services, visit the place. How have you in the past built those really key relationships with the people the council serves?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and I answer that at multiple levels, really. So at one level, that kind of openness and transparency is really important. And when you hear the phrase, speak truth to power, well, actually, ultimately, the power is the people. They're the people that vote. They're the people that kind of decide. And ultimately, I've always thought that the pound that I'm spending for a council has come from someone's council tax. That kind of sense of responsibility is really important. I think there's something in that whole mix there of visibility. And it's difficult, though, because as an officer, it's a dangerous space to get between a camera and a politician. And I don't mean it too unkindly, but no one votes for you as an officer. Yeah. But as a politician, they often kind of, want to be the people that are there and up front and interfacing. So that kind of sense of visibility in a supporting kind of enabling sense is really, I think, important. I think relationships with third sector organisations have always been a really important bit for me. I've always liked being part of that. I'm a massive fan of kind of social value and empowering third sector organisations and helping kind of convene things for them. So there's a little bit about, that's a space for a place director to be part of, I think, front and centre. Because you also get from them really important kind of feedback from what's happening in life. When you talk to Age Concern or CAB and they tell you the profile of the sorts of cases that come over their front desk, it tells you what's going on in your communities. You get a sense of the volume and the kind of, the nature of the real issues your people are wrestling with. So those kind of feedback loops, if you know what I mean, for partners are really important. I think going on the road occasionally and kind of just going out and meeting people is really important. So, when I've done things like other people do, which is jump on the bin lorry and spend, a few hours with the binman, actually getting off the bin lorry and maybe talking to a customer while you're there is important. Or spending half a day in your frontline customer service centre and listening to people.
And showing that visibility as well.
Exactly. So there's
you're not just in an office somewhere.
It's a bit about that balance.
Yeah.
So I've always found that one of the most interesting and important things that we do.
And what's your view on co-design with communities, as in service co-design?
Well, I'm a massive fan of that, actually. And I was doing some work in Shropshire with an organisation about kind of community empowerment. And I think there's a lot in that. But that comes from my fundamental belief that as a country, we were built bottom up, actually. When you think back to all of the great things that have happened in terms, I'm not on about Romans, but the things that happened that built the infrastructure around us today, they came bottom up locally. Whether it was bus companies, tram companies, water companies, all the rest of it, they all started in the world of local authorities. So I think there's something about that wave of kind of creativity and capacity and input that communities can have that's really important. So whether that's a planning bit or whether it's an involvement in kind of shaping services, really keen on that. I always think that town and parish councils are really important. They're the real fine grain of democracy, and they're at the front line, and I've always valued their support and input. And I think in the local government reorganisation narrative at the moment, their role in the future is really coming into focus, and how we support them. So really keen to kind of, see them flourish. So it's a really interesting kind of piece, that, which is, well, what are we here to do and who for, really? And
it's the whole purpose of local government, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
To make people's lives better and have that impact. And I think, again, what better way than to ask them the question and to work with them to deliver the most impactful services. I'm keen to ask you about, obviously, this is a leadership podcast, and you're a really experienced director of place and you have, lots of experience under your belt. What would be some of your tips, I guess, or some guidance that you could give to people that are aspiring to be a director of place?
Right. Wow.
Big question.
That's a big question, isn't it? Yeah. I think there's something about, covering the things that we've said is kind of really get to know what it is about your area that ticks, that makes it work. And if there are parts of the system that aren't working properly, really think about what it is that you can do to help and support. So that's a bit about thinking out of the box. I think there is a bit about the horizon scanning. You are primarily going to be the one future gazing, so think about those sorts of skills. There's something about your network of support and where you go to for support and kind of where you get your good ideas from. I learned many years ago to swipe with pride. So if somebody does something really well somewhere else, how can we grab that, use that, tailor it, and bespoke it to our area?
Yeah,
you know, those kind of things. Don't be afraid of that kind of an approach. I think there's something about your points of reference, whether that's kind of challenges, constructive challenges from outside, like academia, who are you kind of linked into there, versus, the 360 stuff for the head under the bonnet and, everything that goes on within your organisation. So that openness to kind of really understanding how you position yourself and what you're good at, what you're, maybe not so good at. So how do you work on those areas you're not so good at and reinforce those or get support around those? I think that self-awareness is really important. And we can't be all things and everything to everybody. So there's a piece about really understanding where your strengths are. And if you've got areas you need support, bring in people that give you that support. And one of the things that, maybe to summarise some of that I see a lot when I help support technical interviews, is how people don't think themselves into the role properly. Actually think about what you can offer in that role, your strengths, your capacities, and then maybe what you'll do to support some of the other kind of things you're not so strong at, and really talk about how it's relevant in that location, in that place, at that time. So I've always tried to kind of hold on to that a little bit.
I think some people miss a trick in interviews in that respect. I think you're dead right. You do have to think yourself into it. And actually, what value are you going to bring to the council, into that job? What impact are you going to make? It's all about impact, isn't it? And even if you're not currently working at that level, or if you're not currently managing as many services, you've really just got to put your head into that job and really sell yourself in, haven't you?
You have. And what I've learned is, of course, there are cycles in life. There's a cycle where there's growth. And then there are kind of recessionary cycles where, lots of people in your community are made redundant, businesses are at risk, and there are different skill sets in each of those different environments. And some people are, more naturally better at one than the other. So there's a little bit about timing and understanding that kind of sense of, what works for you at that time when you're planning your career, and how you position yourself in that agenda as well. And there's a balance in there, isn't there, about if you're a development kind of, led individual, well, that kind of growth trajectory is really great for you. If you're more of a social impact, concerned focus, then the recessionary stuff is going to be really important. So there's a bit about trying to match where you are at that time with that organisation and that place's kind of needs. And if you can pull that out as a leader looking for a role, then you're going to be, really kind of pushing into a sweet spot there, right?
Yeah, I agree. Thanks. That's really good advice. Now, people going for their first place director job might not necessarily get it first time. They might, if they're the right person for it. And there's lots of reasons why someone might not be successful first time in getting, their dream job as director of place. Could you talk to us a little bit about if you're comfortable, your sort of applications over the years, and where perhaps you haven't got the job, and how you bounce back, and how do you keep going until you do get to the level you're destined to be at?
Yeah. I suspect my strike rate, if you like, has probably been, 1 out of 3.
Okay.
To be really honest. And when I talk to other people, probably a lot of other people similarly, and there's something about what that teaches you is what I've just been talking about, really, is what's right at that time for that organisation and how you really tune into it. And there's something about understanding. There's something about really spending a bit of time researching the role and getting under the skin of it and conveying that. But of course, it's very difficult when you're up against maybe people that are local, that have got a breadth of experience and knowledge of the area. So there's a little bit about, don't kind of overthink it, but really prepare well. And then maybe be quite cautious about what it is that you're, how can I better phrase that really? Be really clear about why you're going for that role, because if you're not kind of passionate for it and can really convey that, it shows.
Yeah, it does. And people like us at Tower Hill, or you as a technical assessor, you can sometimes pick that up, can't you, in interviews? So yeah, all about projection and how you convey that. So given obviously LGR is on the horizon for a lot of parts of the country and or devolution in other areas, there, you know, when we first got the white paper last December and we knew LGR was coming, we at Tell Hill, we ran a survey to do a check to see how people were feeling in the sector at that sort of exec level. And interestingly, I think it was about 40-something% of people were considering leaving their organisation, and another high percentage of around 30% or so people were thinking of leaving local government altogether because it was just too risky to stay. Whereas others, that other percentage, felt this is a really great opportunity to drive some really meaningful change and leave this incredible legacy. But what has happened is that we're finding the job market is busier. People are looking to come into the interim world because they're, you know, perhaps feeling a bit uncertain in their current organisations. So long old blurb there. But what would be your what's your take on people moving from a permanent career into a portfolio career? And do you have any tips that might help people land into shorter term work?
Yeah, well, I mean, put it like this. There are currently 21 county councils and 164 district councils going through local government reorganisation. So the size of that potential kind of cohort of people you're talking about, you get a sense of, you know, that's going to be quite
big
significant. But there's a job to do in all sorts of different ways. So I think if you're the kind of individual that is happy to ditch what your previous title was, and kind of where you fitted in an organisation, to be someone who's happy to play a part in something productive and meaningful that's got kind of real purpose to it, then actually that sort of, you know, where you fitted in an organisation, whether you were a chief or a director, doesn't kind of matter. It's all about what you're there to do and deliver. And I think that positions you well if you're in that mindset to look at opportunities in a different way and be really kind of flexible.
Open-minded.
But if you're in a particular mindset of this is what I do, this is what I specialise in, and you're only going to look for those opportunities, they're not going to be as kind of broad as you might have hoped, really. So I think that kind of flexibility is really important, and adaptability to kind of, you know, place is important. So that kind of sense of it's not always going to be local. You might need to kind of travel around a little bit.
You know that, don't you?
I know that a little bit. Yeah, but that kind of thing is important. I think just being open.
Especially as a place director.
Exactly.
Being in the place and knowing the place is so important, isn't it?
Exactly. So that kind of openness to all of that, I think is really important. And, you know, it's a little bit lumpy. You know, you might have work for, you know, a few months of the year, and you might have some gaps for a few months of the year. You know, so make sure you're ready for that when you go into it, because if you're in a style of life where you need a certain level of income is fixed for a while, then, you know, I think about what your alternatives would be, because that's just the nature of the work that you do.
Yeah.
So I'm thoroughly enjoying it and really loving the kind of liberty that comes with that, if that makes sense. But what's great is that ability to kind of be part of different teams and kind of just share knowledge and kind of, you know, help them with, you know, based on your experiences previously. So, you know, there's a bit about, it's not just about money, actually. There's a little bit about what keeps the brain going, what keeps you interested in life.
Troubleshooting, helping.
And we all want to make a difference. I know that's a cliche, but in place you make a difference.
You do. No, really pleased to hear it. And it sounds like you're really enjoying your new career. Do you think you'll stay as a portfolio director now?
I think so, for the foreseeable. Yeah, I'm really enjoying it.
Good. I'm sure. I know you can add, so much value around the country. So, glad you're enjoying it. I'd like to know next about if you were to look back at your permanent career thus far, what are some of the things, the leadership lessons that you've learnt, and what do you wish you would have known earlier? Hindsight's a great thing. As you look back, what do you think? Would have been helpful if I knew that, or had considered that more? Yeah.
Well, of course, some of the kind of views I've given you today have been kind of shaped and hardened in the fire of things that have gone right and wrong in years past. And it's kind of an interesting one. I think that kind of sense of, firstly, that openness to the fact that you might not be right is really important. And making sure you've got people around you that can tell you, when you need a reality check, that maybe there's a different way. So I think there's a little bit about understanding you're not always going to be right, but have that kind of sense. So, for example, you might disagree, but don't be disagreeable.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a phrase I use quite often. That bit about fellowship and people. Spending time. Don't assume it's there. You have to spend time with people. Relationships are not a spectator sport. You've got to, make sure that the teams are on board, that you're spending time with your teams, because, there are things at times earlier in my career, I've gone off, we're going to do this, and launched a strategy, and then you turn around and maybe half people still don't understand what it is you're doing, and that happens at all levels,
So is there a piece about pace there, or getting the buy-in?
There's a piece about, both, isn't there? It's matching the two together, that kind of thing, So, that kind of youth and exuberance kind of then with age and experience kind of blending together, just kind of help you make sure that you're setting everybody up for success rather than just thinking, right, we're all going to follow this, aren't we? Yeah. So that kind of sense of what is good change management, I think, is a developed skill. You can learn the principles, but carrying people along is really, really important. And it's I'm full of phrases this morning, aren't I? But the journey is part of the strategy. Don't focus just on the end product. Focus on how you get there and what needs to happen to carry everybody there as well. Yeah. So I think they're probably my big lessons. And then the other bit is, I mentioned this earlier, which is spend a bit of time thinking about other people around the table. So if you're in a leadership team, I spend a lot of time thinking about what is it that really is under the skin of issues going on in adults care or children's care or some other service, because that really helps you bring creativity to the table. So that kind of sense of, don't just think I'm the place director and I'll do place, is where I'm going with that. We're all part of a team. Most best athlete on the pitch, let's say, for a particular thing, and be afraid to step out your comfort zone. And I think there's something about being confident enough to do that. And
that's being part of a corporate leader across an organisation. Like you say, you're not just in the lane of place. They all speak to each other, and you've got to have that corporate view more broadly beyond, your direct responsibilities. So thank you for those reflections. Earlier, we were talking about place services often being the first areas to get service cuts, funding cuts, etc. And with that in mind, there's also still this agenda of we've got to keep growing. We've got to keep, got to make sure our local economy is stronger. There's jobs for people are upskilled. We need to regenerate town centres, and growth is very much on the agenda at all times. How do you manage that narrative when, you're making cuts, one side and then trying to grow on the other side? And how do you stay resilient?
Yeah. Well, firstly, I think the kind of whole, is it a statutory service or a discretionary service, is a massive red herring. Some of the most important things councils do are not actually wrapped in statutory legislation. And you've just talked about economic growth and development. Bits of it are, but the kind of the full effort to kind of grow your local economy, if you don't really understand that, then actually that's a spiral downwards, in my view. Yeah. But here's an interesting reflection. When you look at how much councils spend on local economic growth and development versus all the other things they do, it's a tiny fraction. And that's one of my real concerns at the moment, is where does the money to support local business come from? What I mean by that is, in most parts of this country, 97.5% of those businesses will be small and medium enterprises. What they value is their local kind of business growth hub, giving them advice on kind of maybe HR, or, what does a good business plan look like, or how do I best kind of, grow my supply chain kind of network? And that fine grained stuff is really important. Now, that's easily overlooked and undervalued when you're in the midst of kind of budget discussions about, we've got this service to pay for or that service to pay for. So I think one of the challenges for, people in place-based roles is to kind of bring that to light. It's kind of that, and I used the phrase earlier about having evidence for action, kind of really be able to talk about the outcomes, the outputs, the impacts, the difference that the things you're doing will really make. And it is this bit about, if you're not careful, we spend all the money on rescue and none on prevent.
Yeah.
So I think if we can kind of, find ways of being able to tell stories that show how the prevent makes a massive impact is a really important piece.
Yeah.
So, and that's traditionally, of course, where some of that funny money from government has kind of, come from to support those sorts of things. Not much of it around at the moment, really.
Well, there's the Pride in Place sort of allocations that are being sort of dangled at the moment. My understanding is that not everyone knows how much they've been allocated and how it can be spent. So there's a bit of unknown with the funny money, isn't there?
But here we go. So, if we go back to the Blair Brown government, we had a framework of regional development agencies, 9 of them around the country, each spending something like 300 odd million a year on local economic growth and development. And we had kind of local area agreements and local partnerships. And at Birmingham, I remember that my neighbourhood working fund was 49 million a year, for example. None of that money exists anymore. So we're talking about a scale of investment that is completely different, if we're really honest.
Yeah.
And I think there's something there about us really understanding nationally about what we need to do to prime our economy. The sort of resources that we're talking about at the moment aren't touching the sides. So kind of leveraging things. So, for example, one of, I think, the really most important things I've ever got involved with was conceiving the kind of enterprise zone for Birmingham of 26 town centre sites, which were, it was a growth in business rate model. So we were taking all the risk about that growth in business rate. It was going to be 972 million. Wow. And that funded what people see today as that development in Paradise Circus. About 140 million of it did that, but it leveraged 700 million of private sector investment. Now, that investment would never have happened if we'd have never taken that risk, if we'd have never come up with that model, and government hadn't just let us keep the money. And of course, if you think of it like this, with enterprise zones, it was growth that otherwise wouldn't happen. Government weren't giving away any money. They were giving away the opportunity cost of future growth. And what examples like that do show what can happen when you've got that kind of creativity and that ability to make things happen locally. So there's that in the middle of it. It's not just, a dependency on money falling out of government. It's kind of just fiscal flexibility and freedom. I think it's really important. And
taking calculated risks.
Exactly.
Careful calculated risks.
Commercial risks.
Yeah. So Mark, at Tower Hill, we are public sector executive search and executive interim recruitment specialists. So our client base is purely public sector organisations, and we're really proud of the impact that we all make as individuals and collectives for local government and the wider public sector. So our internal sort of motto, I guess, at Tower Hill is love the impact you make, which is our sort of employee value proposition, and it's something that really drives us. So on the theme of that, I'd really like to know, when you reflect on your public sector career to date, what impact stands out as the one that you're most proud of, and what part of delivering that impact has mattered most to you?
That's a really hard question, isn't it? It's also a really hard. Can I very quickly just give you different ones?
Yeah,
some
of course.
Different ones,
yeah.
So in a people sense, in an organisation kind of people sense, it was being chief exec at Newcastle-under-Lyme, putting in a change programme around people and the way we serve customers that led us to become the first ever public or private organisation to go straight in at Investors in People Gold.
Wow.
And the bit that really touched me was when the assessors said, this feels like a private sector organisation, just in terms of the culture you've created. So that kind of people bit, I think, was really good there. I've given you an example just of kind of, that change in Birmingham around Paradise Circus and the Enterprise Zone. When I go through the centre of Birmingham and I look at those developments and I think that wouldn't have been there if we hadn't have had those conversations and we hadn't have done that. That's really quite a striking kind of thing too. In terms of some of those kind of areas that are kind of not usual. One of the things it's maybe a small example, but this is quite powerful for me. I used to chair the West Midlands Economic Inclusion Panel. And we kept looking at kind of information around all sorts of cohorts of kind of people that were really struggling. And we looked at the youth offending register and kind of just what some of the kind of situations some young people were struggling with. So we managed to pull together a piece of work that got 25 young people who were stuck at the bottom of the youth offending register. And working with the Housing Association, we gave them proper apprenticeships and proper jobs, and many of them got rehoused from abusive families or, drug-dependent families. And after 3 years, 22 of those 25 completed their apprenticeships. Interestingly, we saved the state £5 million, and those people got put on a better trajectory for life.
Amazing.
And that kind of sense of how in roles like this you can change people's lives is very real when you kind of look at examples like that. So, those are probably my biggest three.
I think finally, what advice would you give to people that perhaps don't work in the public sector? Perhaps they work currently in the private sector, or even they do work in the public sector but outside of local government. What opportunities are there for people coming into the sector, and how would you encourage that?
I think the boundaries between the sectors, if you like, are really blurring much more than ever before. And the public sector needs more of that cross-fertilisation that comes from people with those kind of skill sets that we need today and tomorrow. So we've talked a bit earlier about commercial kind of understanding, having a highly commercial kind of background, understanding how you can make things happen with very little resource is a really important skill. That ability to kind of manage and adapt to change, I think, is really important. And it's not just kind of, private to public. You're seeing people move out of kind of military backgrounds into local government. Well, there's a lot of kind of relevant skills there about, big logistics, managing big groups of people on different tasks, and bringing about change. I wouldn't constrain yourself. There's a bit there about just think about a phrase we used earlier, think yourself into the role and think about how you could fit in that role and really add value. We've all got something different to bring.
We do. And I think more recently I've seen local authorities being more open-minded about different skill sets of people coming in with a more commercial mindset to help to run the organisation a bit more commercially. So there's definite value and benefits of bringing people in that, don't come from the sector purely.
Yeah, well, and the other bit is, of course, we're an ageing workforce in the sector. So there's a bit about where does the talent come from? How are we getting that flow of younger people into our organisations that we need? We're seeing massive pressures in terms of specialist areas of activity like building control surveyors or highways technicians. And the only real way to tackle that is to grow your own, actually. So there's something about in the role as a place director, kind of, if you like, I use the phrase a lot, make or buy. We're market moderators as well. And if we don't kind of invest and grow in our own, then actually those things kind of come back to haunt us. And we're starting to see some of that already. Yeah, we are indeed. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having you on here. And I think you've shared some really valuable leadership insights for current or future place leaders. So thank you very much for your time and for sharing your wisdom. Great. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Pleasure. At Tower Hill, we work with leaders like Mark, the very people who are shaping the future of the public sector. We're passionate about connecting talented people with organisations that make a real difference. So if you're a leader looking for your next opportunity or an organisation looking for support in finding the right people, we'd love to hear from you. You can find out more about us at tile-hill.co.uk or connect with us on LinkedIn to see how we can help to support you in your career. Until next time, we'll see you on the other side of the hill.